It's a long story, but I won't tell you everything. Some details won't be of great interest to you, while others, as you see, I was born in Khartoum and grew up without a father, he having died several months before I was born. He did, nonetheless, leave us something with which to meet our needs. He used to trade in camels. I had no brothers or sisters, so life was not difficult for my mother and me. When I think back, I see her clearly with her thin lips resolutely closed, with something on her face like a mask, I don't know, a thick mask, as though her face were the surface of the sea. Do you understand? It possessed not a single color, but a multitude, appearing and disappearing and intermingling. We had no relatives. She and I acted as relatives to each other. It was as if she were some stranger on the road with whom circumstances had chanced to bring me. Perhaps it was I who was an odd creature, or maybe it was my mother who was odd. I don't know. We used not to talk much. I used to have, you may be surprised, a warm feeling of being free, that there was not a human being by father or mother to tie me down as a tent peg to a particular spot, a particular domain. I would read and sleep, go out and come in, play outside the house, loaf around the streets, and there would be no one to order me about. Yet I had felt from childhood that I was different. I mean that I was not like other children of my age. I wasn't affected by anything. I didn't cry when hit, wasn't glad if the teacher praised me in class, didn't suffer from the things the rest did. I was like something rounded, made of rubber. You throw it in the water and it doesn't get wet. You throw it on the ground and it bounces back. That was the time when we first had schools. I remember now that people were not keen about them, and so the government would send its officials to scour the villages and tribal communities, while the people would hide their sons. They thought of schools as being a great evil that had come to them with the armies of occupation. I was playing with some boys outside our house when along came a man dressed in uniform, riding a horse. He came to a stop above us. The other boys ran away and I stayed on, looking at the horse and the man on it. He asked me my name and I told him. "How old are you?" He said. "I don't know," I said. "Do you want to study at a school?" "What's a school?" I said to him. "A nice stone building in the middle of a large garden on the banks of the Nile. The bell rings and you go into class with the other pupils. You learn reading and writing and arithmetic." "Will I wear a turban like that?" I said to the man, indicating the dome-like object on his head. The man laughed. "This isn't a turban," he said. "It's a hat." He dismounted and placed it on my head, and the whole of my face disappeared inside it. "When you grow up," the man said, "and leave school and become an official in the government, you'll wear a hat like this." "I'll go to school," I said to the man. He seated me behind him on the horse and took me to just such a place as he had described, made of stone on the banks of the Nile, surrounded by trees and flowers. We went in to see a bearded man wearing a jibbah, who stood up, patted me on the head and said, "But where's your father?" When I told him my father was dead, he said to me, "Who's your guardian?" "I want to go to school," I said to him. The man looked at me kindly, then entered my name in a register. They asked me how old I was, and I said I didn't know, and suddenly the bell rang, and I fled from them and entered one of the rooms. Then the two men came along and led me off to another room, where they sat me down on a chair among other boys. At noon, when I returned to my mother, she asked me where I'd been, and I told her what had happened. For a moment she glanced at me curiously, as though she wanted to hug me to her, for I saw that her face had momentarily lit up, that her eyes were bright and her lips had softened, as though she wished to smile or say something. But she did not say anything. This was a turning point in my life. It was the first decision I had taken of my own free will. I don't ask you to believe what I tell you. You are entitled to wonder and doubt. You're free. These events happened a long time ago. They are, as you will now see, of no value. I mention them to you because they spring to mind, because certain incidents recall certain other ones. At any rate, I devoted myself with the whole of my being to that new life. Soon I discovered in my brain a wonderful ability to learn by heart, to grasp and comprehend. On reading a book, it would lodge itself solidly in my brain. No sooner had I set my mind to a problem in arithmetic than its intricacies opened up to me, melted away in my hands as though they were a piece of salt I had placed in water. I learned to write in 2 weeks, after which I surged forward, nothing stopping me. My mind was like a sharp knife, cutting with cold effectiveness. I paid no attention to the astonishment of the teachers, the admiration or envy of my schoolmates. The teachers regarded me as a prodigy, and the pupils began seeking my friendship. But I was busy with this wonderful machine with which I had been endowed. I was cold as a field of ice. Nothing in the world could shake me. I covered the first stage in 2 years, and in the intermediate school I discovered other mysteries, amongst which was the English language. My brain continued on, biting and cutting like the teeth of a plow. Words and sentences formed themselves before me as though they were mathematical equations. Algebra and geometry as though they were verses of poetry. I viewed the vast world in the geography lessons as though it were a chessboard. The intermediate was the furthest stage of education one could reach in those days. After 3 years, the headmaster, who was an Englishman, said to me, "This country hasn't got the scope for that brain of yours, so take yourself off. Go to Egypt or Lebanon or England. We have nothing further to give you." I immediately said to him, "I want to go to Cairo." He later facilitated my departure and arranged a free place for me at a secondary school in Cairo, with a scholarship from the government. This is a fact in my life, the way chance has placed in my path people who gave me a helping hand at every stage, people for whom I had no feelings of gratitude. I used to take their help as though it were some duty they were performing for me. When the headmaster informed me that everything had been arranged for my departure to Cairo, I went to talk to my mother. Once again she gave me that strange look. Her lips parted momentarily as though she wanted to smile. Then she shut them, and her face reverted to its usual state, a thick mask, or rather a series of masks. Then she disappeared for a while, and brought back her purse, which she placed in my hand. "Had your father lived," she said to me, "he would not have chosen for you differently from what you have chosen for yourself. Do as you wish. Depart or stay, it's up to you. It's your life, and you're free to do with it as you will. In this purse is some money which will come in useful." That was our farewell. No tears, no kisses, no fuss. 2 human beings had walked along a part of the road together, then each had gone his way. This was in fact the last thing she said to me, for I did not see her again. After long years and numerous experiences, I remembered that moment, and I wept. At the time, though, I felt nothing whatsoever. I packed up my belongings in a small suitcase and took the train. No one waved to me, and I spilled no tears at parting from anyone. The train journeyed off into the desert, and for a while I thought of the town I had left behind. It was like some mountain on which I had pitched my tent, and in the morning I had taken up the pegs, saddled my camel, and continued my travels. While we were in Wadi Halfa, I thought about Cairo, my brain picturing it as another mountain, larger in size, on which I would spend a night or two, after which I would continue the journey to yet another destination. I remember that in the train I sat opposite a man wearing a clerical garb and with a large golden cross round his neck. The man smiled at me and spoke in English, in which I answered. I remember well what that amazement expressed itself on his face, his eyes opening wide directly he heard my voice. He examined my face closely, then said, "How old are you?" I told him I was 15, though actually I was 12. but I was afraid he might not take me seriously. "Where are you going?" said the man. "I'm going to a secondary school in Cairo." "Alone?" he said. "Yes," I said. Again he gave me a long, searching look. Before he spoke, I said, "I like traveling alone. What's there to be afraid of?" At this, he uttered a sentence to which at the time I did not pay much attention. Then, with a large smile lighting up his face, he said, "You speak English with astonishing fluency." When I arrived in Cairo, I found Mr. Robinson and his wife awaiting me. Mr. Stockwell, the headmaster in Khartoum, having informed them I was coming. The man shook me by the hand and said, "How are you, Mr. Said?" "Very well, thank you, Mr. Robinson," I told him. Then the man introduced me to his wife, and all of a sudden I felt the woman's arms embracing me and her lips on my cheek. At that moment, as I stood on the station platform amidst a welter of sounds and sensations, with the woman's arms round my neck, her mouth on my cheek, the smell of her body, a strange European smell, tickling my nose, her breast touching my chest, I felt, a boy of 12, a vague sexual yearning I had never previously experienced. I felt as though Cairo, that large mountain to which my camel had carried me, was a European woman, just like Mrs. Robinson, its arms embracing me, its perfume and the odor of its body filling my nostrils. In my mind, her eyes were the color of Cairo, gray-green, turning at night to a twinkling like that of a firefly. "Mr. Said, you are a person quite devoid of a sense of fun," Mrs. Robinson used to say to me, and it was true that I never used to laugh. "Can't you ever forget your intellect?" she would say, laughing, and on the day they sentenced me at the Old Bailey to 7 years imprisonment, I found no bosom except hers on which to rest my head. "Don't cry, dear child," she had said to me, patting my head. They had no children, Mr. Robinson. No children. Mr. Robinson knew Arabic well and was interested in Islamic thought and architecture, and it was with them that I visited Cairo's mosques, its museums and antiquities. The district of Cairo they loved best was Al-Azhar. When our feet wearing of walking about, we'd take ourselves off to a cafe close by the Al-Azhar mosque, where we would drink tamarind juice and Mr. Robinson would recite the poetry of Al-Ma'ari. At that time, I was wrapped up in myself and paid no attention to the love they showered on me. Mrs. Robinson was a buxom woman and with a bronzed complexion that harmonized with Cairo, as though she were a picture tastefully chosen to go with the color of the walls in a room. I would look at the hair of her armpits and would have a sensation of panic. Perhaps she knew I desired her, but she was sweet, the sweetest woman I've ever known. She used to laugh gaily and was as tender to me as a mother to her own son. They were on the quayside when the ship set sail with me from Alexandria. I saw her far away waving to me with her handkerchief, then drying her tears with it, her husband at her side, his hands on his hips. Even at that distance, I could almost see the limpid blueness of his eyes. However, I was not sad. My sole concern was to reach London, another mountain, larger than Cairo, where I knew not how many nights I would stay. Though I was then 15, I looked nearer 20, for I was as taut and firm-looking as an inflated water skin. Behind me was a story of spectacular success at school, my sole weapon being that sharp knife inside my skull, while within my breast was a hard, cold feeling, as if it had been cast in rock. And when the sea swallowed up the shore, and the waves heaved under the ship, and the blue horizon encircled us, I immediately felt an overwhelming intimacy with the sea. I knew this green, infinite giant as though it were roving back and forth within my ribs. The whole of the journey I savored that feeling of being nowhere, alone, before and behind me either eternity or nothingness. The surface of the sea when calm is another mirage, ever changing and shifting, like the mask on my mother's face. Here too was a desert laid out in blue-green, calling me. The mysterious call led me to the coast of Dover, to London, and tragedy. Later, I followed the same road on my return, asking myself during the whole journey whether it would have been possible to have avoided any of what happened. The string of the bow is drawn taut, and the arrow must needs shoot forth. I looked to right and left at the dark greenness, at the Saxon villages standing on the fringes of hills, the red roofs of houses vaulted like the backs of cows. A transparent veil of mist is spread above the valleys. What a great amount of water there is here. How vast the greenness, and all those colors. The smell of the place is strange, like that of Mrs. Robinson's body. The sounds have a crisp impact on the ear, like the rustle of birds' wings. This is an ordered world. Its houses, fields, and trees are arranged in accordance with a plan. The stream too do not flow as zigzag courses, but flow between artificial banks. The train stops at a station for a few minutes. Hurriedly people get off, hurriedly others get on, then the train moves off again, no fuss. I thought of my life in Cairo. Nothing untoward had occurred. My knowledge had increased and several minor incidents had happened to me. A fellow student had fallen in love with me and had then hated me. "You are not a human being," she had said to me. "You're a heartless machine." I had loafed around the streets of Cairo, visited the opera, gone to the theater, and once I had swum across the Nile. Nothing whatsoever had happened except that the water skin had distended further. The bowstring had become more taut. The arrow will shoot forth towards other unknown horizons. I looked at the smoke from the engine vanishing to where it is dispersed by the wind and merges into the veil of mist spread across valleys. Falling into a short sleep, I dreamt I was praying alone at the Citadel Mosque. It was illuminated with thousands of chandeliers, and the red marble glowed as I prayed alone. When I woke up, there was the smell of incense in my nose, and I found that the train was approaching London. Cairo was a city of laughter, just as Mrs. Robinson was a woman of laughter. She had wanted me to call her by her first name, Elizabeth, but I always used to call her by her married name. From her I learned to love Bach's music, Keats' poetry, and from her I heard for the first time of Mark Twain, and yet I enjoyed nothing. Mrs. Robinson would laugh and say to me, "Can't you ever forget your intellect?" Would it have been possible to have avoided any of what happened? At that time I was on the way back. I remembered what the priest had said to me when I was on my way to Cairo. "All of us, my son, are in the last resort traveling alone." He was fingering the cross on his chest, and his face lit up in a big smile as he added, "You speak English with astonishing fluency. The language, though which I now heard for the first time, is not like the language I had learned at school. These are living voices and have another ring. My mind was like a keen knife, but the language is not my language. I had learned to be eloquent in it through perseverance, and the train carried me to Victoria Station and to the world of Jean Morris,